Hello. First thing I'm going to do is give a little disclaimer, because for the first part of my talk, I'm going to say maybe some controversial things, and I'm speaking as an architect, not in my official capacity with the City of New York. At the very end, I'm going to give a few comments that reflect my official capacity. In the New York engineering community, a surprising fact is becoming well known. Many of the city's older buildings are considerably more efficient than the newest, highly touted green ones. That's because many of the city's older buildings were built with passive principles in mind, principles that incorporate the knowledge of several millennium of urban human history. These older buildings have enough windows to let the light in, but not so many that they are prone to overheating. They are usually naturally ventilated, and they have a lot of masonry which helps dampen diurnal temperature swings. They were efficient and utilized passive techniques because they had to be. They were built before the era of cheap energy, an era before unsustainability was even possible. One group of older buildings, however, do not perform better, and these are the subject of tonight's conversation, the glass boxes of the post-war era. It's important to understand what went wrong with these buildings so we don't repeat the mistake. I call this chapter the short, dark history of unsustainability because it lasts less than half a century. To a great degree, the buildings of the post-war era can be seen as a response to a sort of technical carte blanche, a suspension of the laws of gravity for architects. New technology, such as central air conditioning and fluorescent lights, allowed architects to design just about any shape, in any orientation, with any skin, and plunk it down just about anywhere on the globe. Then the engineer was given the job of making it habitable, using all the new machinery. Then you'd plug it in and it would run. This is the building on life support. Of course, this cartoon history doesn't do justice to the remarkable achievement of New York's post-war architecture, the aesthetic and cultural expression, the technical creativity and panache, and so forth. But I want to put this issue of sustainability into high relief. The reason why the post-war buildings don't function as efficiently as their predecessors is pretty simple. They just didn't have to. Let's look at the all-glass facade, that hallmark of post-war architecture which has become popular once again. How well does the glass facade work in terms of the thermal and visual comfort of the building's inhabitants? Of course, we all know that all glass buildings were originally used as greenhouses because glass buildings tend to heat up, the origin of the now infamous greenhouse effect. It also tends to glare on the east and west facades, overheating on the south and in the summer, overcooling in the north and in the winter, and downdrafts along the perimeter in the winter. But these problems can be solved, and so the history of the all-glass facade can be seen as the relatively circular story of designers working to solve the problems of its own making. There are problems of its own making. There are the Brise Soleil and sunscreens of Le Corbusier and Edward Durell Stone in the 50s, the mirrored and bronze glasses of the 70s, and the current crop of fritted and filmed and triple paned and variously shaded glazing. But studies have shown there's really no benefit in terms of daylighting when more than half of the facade is glazed. And we pay a great penalty for all that extra glass in terms of heating and cooling load, particularly in North America, because our heat and humidity is much greater in Europe, and it doesn't really allow us to use the double facades that we have just seen before. Estimates differ depending on the building being analyzed, but all the energy experts that I contacted calculate considerable energy losses when building facades are all glass. So if we are now really serious about saving energy, why are we copying the missteps of the post-war era and handicapping ourselves by demanding all glass facades? Which leads me back to the question of the evening, why should we preserve the glass boxes of the post-war era? They are expensive to operate and notoriously expensive and difficult to green. Kahn's magnificent art museum at Yale, for example, cost 4 times as much to restore in constant dollars than it had cost to build in the first place. But I would argue for preserving and greening these buildings for all the reasons that have been mentioned before me this evening, for their aesthetic merit and for the embodied energy that their structures contain. But I think there's another even more important reason. We should preserve these buildings precisely because they went so far down a path that we now see as highly problematical. Preservation should not be limited to nostalgia and aesthetics. It is also a repository of the embodied knowledge of countless people and of generations of thought, not the least of which is technical. We need to keep this record around because we can learn as much from our missteps as from our successes. And we have to analyze how well our buildings actually work so we can learn from the lessons. So now I'm going to put back on my city government hat. And I want to reiterate that the centerpiece of the city's carbon reduction plan is increasing the efficiency of New York City's existing buildings, and that we are going to accomplish this through a series of requirements and incentives. Since we're aiming this citywide at a percentage decrease off our current consumption, you probably all know, we're aiming for 30% by 2030. And we're not aiming for every building to achieve an energy per square foot target. I think the post-war glass boxes won't be particularly disadvantaged in this regard. They may be starting out with a higher baseline, but they can probably cut back the same percent. Like all other buildings, the post-war glass boxes will be able to contribute by improving their operations and maintenance practices, by updating their HVAC systems and lighting equipment, by rebuilding their glass envelopes with newer, more insulating glazing systems. And also, I think, given the amount of glazing, there's also the opportunity for significant daylight harvesting in these buildings. So that's it.